There are a million very different flatbreads they call focaccia in Italy. This is not one of them. This is my own little focaccia. My goal was to make one that's flavorful enough to eat all by itself. This dough holds a secret. Mini sheet pans are a great thing for the home kitchen. They fit in the dishwasher, and I don't need a whole sheet pan's worth of bread. I just need a little. For that much, I'll start with a cup of water, 237 mils. Into that goes a teaspoon of dry yeast, which is more than you'd normally use for focaccia, but I just really like the taste of extra fermentation. Summon forth the upside-down bear, or put in a little spoonful of any form of sugar, mostly for flavor. The yeast don't really need it. Now I've got some pecorino cheese, but any hard grating cheese will do. I'm going to finely grate a little pile, maybe 30 grams or thereabouts, and yep, I'm putting it directly inside my bread dough. Don't do much more than that, or else it lessens your rise, either chemically or physically. I'm not sure of the mechanism. Maybe a teaspoon of this kosher salt, certainly not more. The cheese is salty, and we're going to put a finishing salt on top of the bread. For flavor and a little more substantial texture, I'm throwing in a big spoonful of cornmeal. It makes the bread really satisfying to chew on. And then I like a couple of big spoonfuls of whole wheat flour. The earthy taste of the bran helps to balance the richness of the bread. Focaccia is generally soaked in olive oil. Now we need bread flour. All of the dry ingredients we've put in thus far will weaken the gluten structure, so we need extra gluten to compensate. Otherwise, you can make focaccia with straight all-purpose flour. I'm also skipping any oil inside the dough because that would weaken the gluten network too. Measure your bread flour if you want, but I'm just going to stir it in until it looks right. For a super high hydration dough like this, I think a good trick is to see if you can lift the dough up with your spoon. That just breaks. It's still a paste, not a dough. I want to work in just enough flour until it behaves like a dough. It's a coherent mass. I can pick it up and it won't just fall apart. That's good. That gets you about 80% hydration, which is perfect. I've probably got just under 200 grams of flour total in there. That includes the whole wheat and the cornmeal. No need to knead. Just cover it and let it rise for a couple hours, or throw it in the fridge and let it ferment slowly for a day or two if you have the time. Much better flavor that way. And it's okay if this doesn't rise much in the fridge. The gluten isn't developed enough to capture air bubbles, but the fermentation has been happening. It smells great, though it's too sticky to handle. When working with extremely wet doughs, you can flour your hands or you can wet your hands to avoid sticking. I want a really wet dough, so I'm using water, and I like to do this kind of thing right in the sink so that I can wet my hand over and over again. I'm just grabbing an end, stretching it out, and then folding it back over the dough. Stretch and fold until the dough won't stretch anymore. I'll grab my mini sheet pan and put in more than enough olive oil to coat. Focaccia is basically a shallow fried bread. While my hands are still oily, I'll grab my dough and use it like a sponge to coat the inside of the pan with oil and to coat all sides of the dough in the process. If you want to bake a bigger focaccia in a normal home sheet pan, which is technically a half sheet pan, you would just double or triple this recipe, depending on how thick or thin you want the bread. I'll push this out as flat as I can, but I won't be able to do much. The gluten is too tense from that stretching and folding. Cover this with something that won't actually touch the dough, like a big bowl, and let rise at room temperature until quite puffy, an hour or two probably. Time now for me to earn that high-carb, high-fat treat with a high-protein breakfast from Magic Spoon, sponsor of this video. In marked contrast with the focaccia, there is 0 grain in Magic Spoon. 0 grams sugar, no sugar alcohols. They use low-cal alternatives like allulose and stevia to make better-for-me cereals that taste like the junk food of my childhood. Ooh, birthday cake. This used to be a limited release they only did on the birthday of their company, but the fans said they want it year-round, and now you can get it year-round. It tastes like sprinkles, and yet it's basically made out of protein powder. Magic Spoon is made of milk protein instead of grain. 13 grams of protein in a serving of these absurd birthday-os. Snap my QR code or go to magicspoon.com/Ragusia. Use my code Ragusia and get $5 off the variety box of your choice. I recommend the fruity, but the new birthday cake is pretty awesome. If you don't like it, they'll give you your money back, no questions asked. Link and code are in the description to save $5. Thank you, Magic Spoon. Okay, my dough has proofed. I'll top it with a little more olive oil and then use my fingertips to dimple the dough. This is the classic way of docking focaccia dough. It keeps the bread from bulging into more of a round loaf shape in the oven, and it creates little wells to hold olive oil. This will taste great and help this brown more in the oven. I can also easily stretch this out into the corners now since we let the gluten rest and relax. And now is the time to sprinkle on some big crunchy salt. I'm using Maldon smoked sea salt, which is my favorite finishing salt, hashtag not an ad. And just throw that in maybe a 400 degree Fahrenheit, 200 C oven. While I wait, I'll peel and chop some garlic reasonably fine. Then I'll chop up this fresh sage. Rosemary is more common on focaccia, but today I have sage and I love sage. Then I'll get a big knob of butter and put this into a microwave-safe vessel with my garlic, and I will microwave that until the butter is melted. In the process, the garlic will cook a bit and its flavor will mellow. The easiest way to make garlic butter. Then I will add in my sage. 400F 200C is a little low for focaccia, but that's because I'm making a particularly thick one and it needs more time to bake through before the surface gets too dark. When you poke it, it should feel firmly springy when it's done. That only took like 15 minutes. While it's still hot, I'm going to brush on my herby garlic butter. This tastes amazing and makes the bread shiny on top, if you brush it on at the last minute. These little pans came with a non-stick coating so I can slide my bread out, but if you're working with a stickier pan, line it with parchment paper before the dough goes in. The cheese inside this dough makes it especially likely to stick. Here, I baked a double batch inside my enameled roasting tray, and it stuck so bad that I couldn't get it out. Learn from my mistakes. Let's cut that in half, and this recipe definitely tends toward the spongier versions of focaccia, which I really like. Flavor is super rich and funky and fermented, but also earthy from our adjunct grains. Have that with a glass of wine and call it dinner. But focaccia is uncommonly good for sandwiches because of how flat it is and how easy it is to bite through, so I'm going to grate up some Gruyere or any smooth melting cheese, pile that on, and then I've got some bresaola, which is cured beef, probably my favorite salumi these days. More cheese on top, sandwich it up, and you could wrap this in foil before it goes in the oven to keep it soft, but I want to let it crisp up all over, so right on the bars. The dirty pan will catch any drippings. A few minutes later, everything is melty and crispy, and because this focaccia is a little cake-like and brittle, this whole sandwich is really easy to bite through without squeezing the fillings out the side. That is living, my friends. That is living.